Welcome along to the unit analysis series. If you want to check out my other videos, I've done videos on the armies, the army analysis series for most periods, and also top 10 lists for most periods. So please check those videos out. But this series is going to focus on the units themselves. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the unit and the army, and then we'll look at how the unit plays in the game. So this is the Assyrian list. The Neo-Azrian Empire spanned from 911 BC to 609 BC, and it revolutionized warfare. It's generally acknowledged by historians to be the first truly world empire because it spanned from Egypt all the way to Armenia and Iran. They were the first empire and army to use iron, so they had the advantage over their neighbors who were basically still Bronze Age armies, and in the game you can see that replicated in the armor. The guard foot, the heavy foot, they both, and look at these wonderful shields, they're both fully armored, whereas Mede spearmen, Egyptian spearmen, these kind of units, they are just protected. So the Assyrians have the armor advantage. Hoplites as well, a lot of hoplites, veteran hoplites, citizen hoplites, even mercenary hoplites, they're all protected. The Assyrians also formed the first professional standing army in 745 BC. So they were very well trained, and I think this is part of the reason why these troops are 50% bow, 50% spear. They were half and half. If you remember, when we looked at the Sparrow foot, that is essentially a bowman unit. It was only the first rank that was spear, and then the 9 ranks behind were all bowmen, whereas this is a truly mixed unit. So I guess your training has to be that much better because you are going to be fighting as bowmen, releasing your arrows, firing away, and then you want to get your infantry engaged. So that coordination has to be pretty spot on, whereas I guess with the Sparrow foot you're really fighting as bowmen most of the time, and then you'd just fight in melee kind of as a last resort. But I guess these kind of units would be much more on the offensive. It's estimated at the peak of the Assyrian Empire, they could field 200 to 300,000 men, which is an awful lot for this period, this era. And in a campaign, Shalmaneser III, on a campaign in Egypt, he had an army of 120,000 men, which again is an absolutely huge army for this time. There were different ethnic groups because the empire was so large. You had a lot of different ethnic groups, lower castes, lower classes fighting in the army. And what you see is this is kind of also represented in the game because the peasants and the lower classes tend to be in what was classed as light infantry, which is medium infantry, I guess, in this game, and slingers and so on. And if you look at the uniforms, in the medium foot, their helmets are pretty rounded, whereas the true Assyrian helmet is this kind of shape, long with quite a clear tip there. And these were for the higher noblemen, and they tended to fight in the heavy foot, guard foot, for the chariots, and in the cavalry. So again, you can see their helmets there. Yeah. Okay, so that's a little bit about the history. Let's have a look at how the unit does on the battlefield. So how do these units do in the game? Well, let's start with the guard foot. Now, the guard foot, just to be clear, this is not a mixed bow unit. It's just the heavy foot, medium foot, and the raw medium foot that are mixed units. So it's unfortunate, but this is still an excellent unit because it's heavy foot, armored, superior quality swordsman. So when you look at the stats and what it's fighting in this period, against citizen hoplites, Mede spear, Hebrew foot, Phoenician foot, armored hoplites, it's 50 up against all of those units on impact. And then in melee, it's 25 up on citizen hoplites, evens against the armored hoplites. But you've got to remember, even though they're evens, because of their quality, they're going to have the advantage with the cohesion checks over the armored hoplites, who are only average quality, so they're much more likely to disrupt. And then the swordsman light spear units, like the Mede spear, Hebrew foot, Phoenician foot, they are 75 down in melee against this unit, so it's going to rip through most units that it faces. Egyptian spear, 62 down on impact, 37 down in melee, plus it's below average quality, so that unit's not going to last. The immortals, evens on impact, and then they are 50 up in melee. If you factor in that they're armored, the immortals are probably not going to do so much damage against armored units with their bow and arrow, so they're going to have an advantage there. They're going to be able to get in close, and then in melee they are 50 up. The only unit really that they're going to maybe struggle against is armored veteran hoplites, because they're evens on impact and 50 down in melee. But, well, number one, there's only ever 2 max. At 1200 points, armies can only field 2 max, and not all of the hoplite armies have those units. The Lydian army, Cypriot army, they don't have access to the armoured veteran hoplites. It's just a list like the Greeks and Spartans. So overall, excellent buy, always take them. Now, the heavy foot, they're in an interesting unit because they're heavy foot and they've got the bow. Okay, their stats in melee isn't as great as what you find it with other units, but against citizen hoplites, armored hoplites, and the Mede spear, they're evens on impact because of the light spear, which is great. It just means they can make use of that kind of round where they're evens, and then before that they're going to be causing casualties, which is really important, because in my tests, yes, they were 25 down against citizen hoplites, one of their most common enemies, but I found in my tests I had like 5 of these units fighting 5 citizen hoplites. Now, because they're only 50% bow, they weren't doing as much damage with missile fire as your standard bow units like the sparrow bow foot. So instead of 30, 40, 50 casualties per volley, it was more like 10, give or take. So it was a lot lower. But if you focused your fire, you really have to, with these units, you've got to focus your fire. And even if you don't disrupt units with the missile fire, you're going to deplete them, and you've got to get them to 75% strength and under, and then you cause an additional -1 modifier to kick in melee, and that is what you want, plus the combat strength modifier. And the combat strength modifier kicks in pretty quickly. You know, casualties are caused if you focus your fire on a unit, 3 or 4 units firing over 2 rounds. You could cause, I don't know, 60 casualties or so, and that is enough to get a fairly substantial advantage in melee. And then that unit will probably break fairly soon, and that gives you an advantage in the hand-to-hand phase, fighting phase. There was also a very interesting stat, and I didn't know this. Maybe a lot of you do know it, maybe some of you don't. These guys are swordsmen. They are swordsmen in melee, and in my tests they were fighting citizen hoplites in the open, and they were, as I said, they were down 25 in the melee round. But then there was some rough ground, and they fell back into the rough ground, and then, to my surprise, they were 25 up against citizen hoplites. Now, in my mind, I always thought that rough ground was bad for all heavy foot, but it seems that swordsmen get their swordsman bonus, so they're really at an advantage. Even if you're heavy foot and you're swordsman, if you're fighting spear, then you get your full swordsman advantage. And because of their armor, I actually went from being 25 down against citizen hoplites to 25 up. So that is something to bear in mind, and you learn something new in this game. I've been playing this game at a good level for a number of years, and I never knew that. It's all these little secrets that you find from playing. So there we go. I'm sharing with you a secret. So rough ground is actually good for swordsmen, even if you're heavy foot when you're fighting the spear. I thought it was just the pikes. I seem to recall pikes suffer on heavy ground more than other heavy foot, but I didn't realize that offensive spear was the same. So there we go. Okay, so these units are basically really good. The armor gives them a great advantage over a lot of units because, as I've said, your standard units, Mede Spear, Hebrew Foot, Phoenician Foot, Citizen Hoplites, Mercenary Hoplites, even Veteran Hoplites, are all protected. They're all protected, not armored. So that's great. And then with the bow and the heavy foot, that is a great combination that hardly any units get that combo, because Sparrow Barrowfoot are just bowmen that fight. Immortals the same, they're bowmen that fight. So these guys have more of an advantage in melee than those units do. Okay, so that's about it. That's my little quick overview. I'm not an expert on this period. If you want to make some comments about the history, then please do, and add links, make suggestions. If there's anything I've missed out, then do let us know. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you again soon.